The chandeliers of the Beverly Hills Grand Hall shimmered like frozen stars, casting a golden glow over the city's most powerful elite. Laughter drifted through the air, polished, expensive, rehearsed. Grant Hollister stood at the center of it all, drinking in the admiration he believed he deserved. He adjusted his cufflinks, boasting about his newly revived business, blissfully unaware that fate was seconds away from crushing his pride. Then the doors opened. Every conversation in the room fell silent as a woman stepped in, framed by the soft halo of the entry lights. Elena Marlowe. The wife he had abandoned when she lay bleeding in a hospital bed. The woman he'd dismissed as a burden the night she lost their unborn child. The woman he thought would never rise again. But this Elena was different. Her midnight gown swept the marble floor like liquid silk, her posture regal, her eyes steady. And beside her, Adrian Sterling, the billionaire every magazine called untouchable. One hand rested protectively on Elena's back, while 3 children trailed behind them, dressed in matching formal wear, their features striking enough to turn heads instantly. A murmur swept through the crowd. Is that her? Impossible. She has children now? And that's Adrian Sterling with her. Why? Grant's glass slipped from his hand and shattered against the floor. His breath caught as he stared at the eldest child, a girl with dark hair and familiar eyes. Eyes he had seen in the mirror his entire life. His pulse thundered, his vision blurred. No. No, it couldn't be. Elena lifted her chin, meeting his gaze without fear, without pain, without even hatred. It was worse. She looked at him as if he no longer existed. Then Adrian leaned down and whispered something into Elena's ear, something that made her smile. And Grant felt the ground tilt beneath him as a horrifying realization clawed up his spine. Tonight was not an accident, it was a reckoning. Grant hadn't even seen the worst part yet. Long before the night she stunned the Beverly Hills elite, Elena Marlowe had been a woman the world overlooked. People remembered her as quiet, gentle, always carrying a sketchbook tucked under her arm as she moved between studios and freelance art jobs around Manhattan. She was the kind of woman who apologized when someone else bumped into her, who stayed late to finish work no one thanked her for, who believed patience could fix anything, even a failing marriage. She had met Grant Hollister when she was 24. Back then, he wasn't the polished man dripping with ambition and arrogance. He was charming, even tender, or at least convincing enough to make her believe kindness lived in him. They met in an art gallery in Brooklyn. She was hanging a student exhibition, and he'd walked in pretending to admire the paintings. Later, she learned he'd merely followed a wealthy investor into the building, but at the time, she thought he came for the art, for her art. Their romance began like a soft spring rain, gentle, refreshing, too delicate to suspect the storm that would follow. Elena didn't come from money. She grew up in a modest home in Connecticut, raised by a single father who worked long nights repairing boats at a marina. When he died unexpectedly, she moved to New York with nothing but a scholarship, a box of his tools, and the hope she could build a life worthy of his sacrifices. Grant liked that about her at first. He liked the way she looked at him, like he was more than he was. He liked that she believed in him, even when he didn't deserve it. He liked that she smiled at the smallest things, a shared sandwich on a park bench, a second-hand bookshelf he built for her art books, a warm coffee on a cold morning. But what he loved most, though he'd never admit it, was that she asked for nothing. As the years passed, his admiration faded into entitlement. Elena's quiet love became a canvas he no longer cared to study. He wanted noise, attention, glamour. She offered steadiness, and he began calling it boring. She offered loyalty, and he called it clingy. She offered her whole heart, and he stepped over it on his way to someone richer. Yet Elena kept believing, kept smoothing the cracks in their marriage, with hope. When she found out she was pregnant, she thought it would bring them closer. She pictured them decorating a nursery, laughing over paint colors, choosing baby names. She imagined Grant reading bedtime stories in his soft, early morning voice, the one he used before ambition hardened it. But Grant didn't change, not for the baby, not for her. His temper grew sharper. His absences grew longer. His criticisms bled into cruelty, and still Elena stayed. She clung to the promise she thought they once shared, unaware she was holding on to the ghost of a man who had already chosen someone else. Grant's betrayal wasn't a sudden blow, it was a slow erosion. Late nights, at work, the faint trace of someone else's perfume on his shirts. Messages he hid behind a passcode he claimed was for security. And the worst part? Elena blamed herself. She told herself she needed to be stronger, better, more helpful, less emotional. She didn't realize she was drowning, because she had been taught all her life to hold her breath. But one night, everything changed. One night revealed the truth she had never imagined. And that night, Grant crossed a line Elena would never be able to forgive. New York had always been a city of contradictions, glittering skylines towering over people who felt impossibly small. For Elena Marlowe, it was a place where dreams and heartbreak lived side by side, often on the same block. Her days unfolded between subway rides, cramped studios, and the echoing halls of wealthy venues she decorated for clients who barely remembered her name. It was a city she loved, even when it loved her back only halfway. Her world revolved around a modest walk-up apartment on the Lower East Side, a place with creaky floors and windows that rattled whenever the wind pushed too hard. She didn't mind the imperfections. They reminded her she was still standing, still breathing. Elena covered the walls with sketches, concept art for galleries, ideas for installations, fragments of the imagination she never had enough time or money to fully bring to life. At night, she worked freelance projects by the light of a cheap desk lamp, blending colors while the city hummed outside her window. Meanwhile, Grant lived a very different New York. His world stretched across penthouses with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, meetings in glass conference rooms high above Manhattan, dinners on Fifth Avenue, where the plates cost more than Elena earned in a week. To him, New York wasn't a home, it was a ladder. Every interaction, a step upward, every person, a tool or an obstacle. Elena had married into that world, but was never allowed to belong to it. She remembered nights when they attended corporate events together. Grant would instruct her on what to say, what not to say, how to smile, how to stand. "Don't mention your art," he'd whisper under his breath. "These people don't care about paintings, they care about power." She would nod, shrinking a little more each time, while crystal chandeliers sparked overhead and the city's elite laughed about things she didn't understand. Still, she tried. She learned the names of CEOs, memorized investment buzzwords, practiced small talk she hated. But no matter how hard she worked to fit in, Grant's world only pushed her further out. Then came the pregnancy. Suddenly, the city felt heavier, every step more exhausting. She still rode the subway to work, still climbed 4 flights of stairs to her apartment, still packed Grant's suits for his endless business trips. She tried to decorate a corner of their bedroom with soft colors, imagining a nursery they would build together. But the swatches of pastel paint sat untouched on the dresser, ignored like everything else she cared about. One night, as Grant arrived home late with the scent of perfume she didn't own lingering on his jacket, Elena asked if they could take a weekend to rest, maybe visit Central Park like they used to. He didn't even look up from his phone. "Elena, you're exhausting. I'm carrying the real weight in this marriage. Try not to make every little thing about you." She stood in the kitchen, nausea rising not from pregnancy, but from the truth she was finally beginning to see. Outside, Manhattan glowed under a wash of city lights. People rushed past each other, chasing success, chasing love, chasing something that felt like belonging. Elena pressed her palm to the cold glass of the apartment window, trying to steady herself. It was the first moment she realized she was desperately alone. But she had no idea that the city would soon shatter her completely, starting with a night at the hospital she would never forget. Grant Hollister had always believed he was meant for bigger rooms, brighter lights, and louder applause than life had ever offered him. Even when he was growing up in a cramped house in Ohio, he carried an air of entitlement that didn't match his circumstances. By the time he reached New York, he'd mastered the art of pretending to be richer, more educated, more connected than he truly was. And Manhattan loved confidence, even the counterfeit kind. When he met Elena, he thought she would be the perfect accessory to his rising image, gentle, naive, easily shaped. She admired him in a way that fed the hunger he'd had since childhood, the hunger to feel superior. At first, he treated her well, because she believed in him completely. But as his ambition sharpened, his affection dulled. And when his company started gaining traction, he began seeing Elena as a weight he needed to cut loose. The shift was subtle at first, the dismissive sighs, the eye rolls when she asked simple questions, the way he corrected her in front of his colleagues, always with a patronizing tone. He crafted an image of himself as the visionary and painted Elena as someone who didn't understand real ambition. But the moment everything truly changed was the night he met Loretta Collins. Loretta was the widow of a billionaire developer, 12 years older than Grant, elegant in a way money effortlessly created. She recognized Grant instantly, not for his achievements, but for his hunger. She saw the shape of his ambition and knew exactly how to exploit it. At a rooftop fundraiser overlooking the Hudson River, she cornered him with a glass of champagne and a smile that never reached her eyes. "You're wasting your potential on sentiment," she told him. "Men like you don't rise with women like her." Those words burrowed into him like a seed waiting to bloom poison. From that night on, Grant spent every evening inventing reasons not to come home. Business meetings, late-night strategy sessions, networking cocktails. Elena believed him because she wanted to. Because pregnancy made her desperately hope for the family she had imagined. Loretta dangled opportunities in front of him like bait. Introductions to investors, whispered promises of funding, and eventually, a relationship that stroked his ego in ways Elena never could. With Loretta, he felt like someone important. With Elena, he felt like someone failing. So he began rewriting history. Whenever Elena tried to talk about the baby, he accused her of emotional manipulation. When she asked why he didn't attend doctor appointments, he said she was too needy. She grew smaller so he could feel larger, and he fed off it until she had nothing left to give. The breaking point came the night she fainted in their kitchen. Elena had been bleeding for hours, terrified something was wrong with the baby. Grant arrived home past midnight, smelling of Loretta's perfume. Instead of rushing her to the hospital, he scolded her for being dramatic. "People work through worse," he snapped. "You can't expect me to drop everything for every little scare." She collapsed moments later, and only then, when he realized she might die in his apartment, did he call an ambulance. It was in that hospital room where everything shattered, where Elena's heart broke in a way she would never fully recover from. Because Grant wasn't done hurting her, not even close. And the next thing he did became the cruelty that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The hospital lights were far too bright that night, harsh, sterile, unforgiving. Elena Marlowe lay curled on the emergency room bed, her gown soaked with fear and hope. She clutched her stomach as the nurses adjusted IV lines and whispered to each other with the kind of quiet urgency reserved for situations that could change lives in seconds. She wanted Grant. She needed him. Despite everything, despite the distance, despite the perfume on his shirt, she still believed he would walk through those sliding doors and tell her it would be okay. That he would sit beside her, hold her hand, and remind her that they were in this together. But hours passed, and Grant never came. A nurse finally asked if she wanted them to call her husband again. Elena nodded weakly. She heard the staff phone ringing down the hall, a distant echo she tried to cling to. She imagined Grant answering, imagined his voice full of worry. But when the nurse returned, her expression told the truth. "He said he's too busy to come. He asked if you could handle it without him." Elena's lips parted, but no sound came out. Busy. He said he was busy. She felt something inside her loosen, something she thought was unbreakable. 30 minutes later, the contractions worsened. A doctor rushed in. "We're losing the heartbeat," he said. "We need to move now." She tried to call Grant herself, her trembling fingers barely gripping the phone. When he finally answered, his voice was clipped, irritated. "Elena, I told you I'm in the middle of something important." "I'm losing the baby," she whispered. "Please, please come." There was a pause. A long, cold pause. Then he sighed. "I can't do this anymore. If the baby survives, fine. If not, maybe it's a sign. I'm done carrying dead weight." She felt the world tilt violently. Before she could respond, he continued, "My lawyer will send papers tomorrow. It's better for both of us." Right there on that hospital bed, moments before they rushed her into surgery, Grant Hollister divorced her. No explanation, no remorse. Just a decision he had probably rehearsed with someone else. Someone richer, someone he believed could upgrade his life. Minutes later, under the blinding surgical lights, Elena lost the baby. When she woke, the room was silent. Her hands were empty. Her heart felt too heavy to lift. A nurse squeezed her shoulder gently, her eyes full of sympathy, not pity, but sorrow for a woman who had been abandoned so completely. Elena asked again if Grant had called. "No," the nurse said softly. but someone else did. She handed Elena a small business card. At first, the name meant nothing. Adrian Sterling. She assumed it was a mistake. Why would a billionaire care about her? But the nurse explained that he had asked about her condition, asked if she was alone, and insisted that hospital staff check on her frequently through the night. Elena didn't have the strength to wonder why. She simply tucked the card under her pillow, her tears soaking the corner. Meanwhile, across the city, Grant wasn't grieving. He was at a private rooftop bar in Midtown, clinking glasses with Loretta Collins, laughing about how free he finally felt. He didn't know a camera in the hospital hallway had captured his cruelty. He didn't know his words would one day return to destroy him. He didn't know that the woman he'd thrown away would rise again. And he certainly didn't know that Adrian Sterling had already entered her story and would soon change everything. In the days after the surgery, the world around Elena Marlowe felt muted, washed in gray, as if someone had drained all the color from her life. When she was released from the hospital, she expected anyone to be there. A husband, a friend, a family member. But no one came. The nurse helped her to a bench outside the building, pressed a warm cup of tea into her hands, and whispered that a social worker could be called if needed. Elena shook her head. She wasn't ready to speak to anyone. She wasn't ready to exist. The winter wind stung her face as she stepped onto the sidewalk. Cars honked, people laughed. A street vendor shouted prices for roasted chestnuts. Life rushed on, indifferent to the quiet devastation of a woman who had just lost everything. She went home alone. The apartment looked unfamiliar, as if grief had changed the shape of the walls. The soft lavender blanket she had bought for the baby lay folded on a chair. She picked it up and pressed it to her face, the fabric instantly dampening with tears she had held back for too long. Elena spent the next hours curled on the kitchen floor, unable to move. She used to believe heartbreak felt like sharp pain, but now she understood it wasn't sharp at all. It was heavy, crushing, a weight that pressed on her chest until she struggled to breathe. Grief blurred into exhaustion. Exhaustion blurred into numbness. She barely ate, she barely slept. She wandered from room to room in a haze, unsure what she was looking for. Maybe a sign of who she used to be. On the third night, she woke from a nightmare drenched in sweat. She reached for her phone without thinking, muscle memory, searching for the man she once trusted. She typed Grant's name into the contact box, then froze. He wasn't her comfort anymore. He was the wound. Her hand trembled violently. She deleted the message before sending it. Instead, she scrolled through old photos. Grant kissing her forehead, Grant smiling in Central Park, Grant holding her hand as if she was the center of his world. She stared at each image until the lies embedded in them became unbearable. When she couldn't stand it anymore, she threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall with a dull crack and fell to the floor. For a moment, she couldn't tell if something broken was inside the phone or inside her. The next morning, an envelope arrived under her door. Inside were divorce papers. No note, no apology, no acknowledgement of the baby they had lost. Just a request for her signature and a line that read, "This decision is final. Please respect my boundaries." Her hands shook so violently she almost dropped the papers. She felt a wave of dizziness, gripping the counter for support. She couldn't believe a man she once loved could be this cold, this calculated, this cruel. By afternoon, she forced herself outside for a walk. She needed air, movement, anything to stop the spiral inside her mind. But with every step through the neighborhood, past mothers pushing strollers, couples laughing in sidewalk cafes, she felt the ache deepen. She didn't belong to their world anymore. She wasn't a mother. She wasn't a wife. She wasn't even sure she was still herself. As she stood at a crosswalk, tears threatening to spill again, a black SUV slowed beside the curb. The window lowered. "Elena?" A calm voice called. She turned. Adrian Sterling sat inside, eyes full of quiet concern, as if he had been searching for her. She blinked, stunned. Why? Why are you here?" He nodded gently toward the passenger seat. "Because no one should face this kind of pain alone." Elena hesitated, her heart trembling, and she had no idea that stepping into that car would change the entire trajectory of her life. Elena hesitated at the curb, unsure whether the man in the sleek black SUV was real or another trick of her exhausted mind. The city lights blurred behind her tears, and for a moment she couldn't reconcile how someone like Adrian Sterling, a billionaire whose name appeared on magazine covers and tech conferences, knew hers at all. She had no space left in her chest for surprises. Not good ones, not painful ones. But something about the calm in his voice steadied her trembling hands. "Elena," he said again, gentler this time, "please get in. It's freezing out here." She slid into the passenger seat, still uncertain. The warmth inside the car wrapped around her like a blanket she didn't earn. She stared at him, trying to understand why he was there. He didn't rush her, didn't fill the silence with empty questions. Instead, he drove slowly through the quiet evening streets, letting her breathe. "You don't know me," she finally whispered. His grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "I know enough." She looked away, unsure what that meant. They pulled up outside a small cafe in the West Village, the kind with warm lighting and fogged windows, where people wrote novels and whispered secrets over late-night coffee. Adrian parked and stepped out, opening her door with an old-fashioned courtesy Grant never possessed. Inside, he ordered her chamomile tea and waited until her hands stopped shaking before speaking again. "The hospital called me," he said simply. Her brow furrowed. "Why? I don't understand." He hesitated for the first time since she met him. "Because your father once asked me to look after you if anything happened." The words struck her like cold water. "My father? You knew him?" Adrian nodded slowly. "Not in the way you're thinking. We weren't close friends, but our companies crossed paths. He trusted very few people, but for some reason, he trusted me." I experienced. "How was very for today's them?" She searched his eyes, trying to detect pity, obligation, or anything that suggested he was here out of guilt. But she saw none of that. Only steady concern, only patience. Something inside her resisted the warmth of it, afraid to lean on anything that might collapse. "He didn't tell me about you," she said. "He didn't tell me much at all," Adrian replied. "But he asked that I make sure you were never left without help if life ever turned cruel." Elena's throat tightened. Everything in her life had fallen apart so violently that she no longer trusted kindness. But sitting across from Adrian, the most untouchable man in the city, she felt a strange sense of safety she hadn't known in years. "Why now?" she whispered. "Why come now?" His jaw tensed for a second, a flash of something darker crossing his expression. "Because I heard what happened at the hospital, and because no decent man would let someone endure a loss like that alone." Her eyes filled with tears. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had spoken to her with such sincerity. "Let me help you get somewhere safe," Adrian added. "Somewhere no one can hurt you, just until you're steady again." Elena shook her head weakly. "I don't want charity." "This isn't charity." His voice softened. "It's a promise I'm finally keeping." The cafe's lights flickered softly across his face. For the first time since losing the baby, she felt the faintest flutter of stability. But Elena didn't yet know the truth. Adrian hadn't told her everything. Because the night her father died, Adrian Sterling was the last person to see him alive. The transition from the cold streets of Manhattan to Adrian Sterling's West Coast sanctuary felt like stepping into another universe. Elena barely remembered the flight, just fragments of soft blankets, dimmed cabin lights, and the quiet way Adrian kept his distance, while still making sure she had everything she needed. When she awoke, the plane had already touched down at a private airfield in Santa Monica, and morning sunlight streamed through the windows like a gentle reminder that time had not stopped, even though her world had. Adrian's home in Malibu was nothing like Grant's sterile penthouse in New York. It was warm, lived in, the kind of place where ocean winds slipped through open windows and sunlight painted golden stripes across hardwood floors. The house overlooked the cliffs, waves smashing against the rocks far below. It should have felt too grand, too luxurious for someone whose life had fallen apart, but strangely, it felt safe. "You can stay here as long as you need," Adrian said quietly as she stepped inside. Elena's throat tightened. "I don't want to burden you." "You aren't," he replied simply. "You're healing." But healing did not happen all at once. The first days were the hardest. She slept too long, cried without warning, walked aimlessly along the shoreline until the cold water numbed her feet. Nights were worse. She'd wake from dreams of holding a child that vanished the moment she opened her eyes. Adrian didn't hover. He didn't push, but she sensed him there, in the soft thud of his footsteps down the hall, in the gentle knock asking if she'd eaten, in the silent cup of tea he'd leave by her door. It wasn't attention, it was presence. Something she'd forgotten the comfort of. One morning, while she sat on the deck staring at the horizon, he placed a small box on the table beside her. "What's this?" she asked. "Something your father meant for you to have someday." His voice held a seriousness she wasn't ready for. Inside the box lay a silver pendant with intricate engravings, her family crest, one she hadn't seen since childhood. She brushed her thumb across the symbol, and for the first time since the hospital, she felt the sharp ache of longing for her father. "I didn't know he kept this," she whispered. "He kept everything connected to you." She looked up sharply. "How do you know that?" Adrian inhaled, gaze drifting toward the ocean. "Your father trusted me with more than you realized. He wanted you protected, and there were people who didn't want him alive." Elena froze, her pulse skipping. "What are you saying?" But Adrian didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, he changed the subject with practiced finesse. "You should start drawing again. It might help." She didn't want to. But days later, she found herself sketching on the deck, the ocean breeze lifting her hair as charcoal glided across paper. At first, her hands shook too much to form lines, but with each attempt, something inside her loosened. She began sketching landscapes, faces, abstract storms of emotion. Adrian passed by one morning, paused, and studied her work with quiet awe. "Elena," he murmured, "you haven't lost your fire, only your belief in it." For the first time in months, she felt something flicker in her chest, tiny, fragile, but alive. She wasn't whole. Not yet. But she was no longer broken. And she didn't know it, but her healing was about to collide with a truth far more dangerous than heartbreak, because the past she thought she'd escaped was already moving toward her with ruthless speed. A storm was coming, and it had Grant Hollister's name on it. In New York, Grant Hollister's world was beginning to unravel slowly at first, then with a momentum he couldn't control. For years, he had walked through Manhattan with the confidence of a man who believed life owed him success. But arrogance has a short shelf life, especially when paired with desperation. It started with a deal gone wrong. One investor backed out, then another. Grant brushed it off as bad timing. Sure, he could talk his way into new opportunities. He had always relied on charm, even when it was paper thin. But charm evaporates when people discover there's nothing solid underneath. Loretta Collins, the woman he'd gambled his marriage for, had stopped answering his calls. At first, he convinced himself she was busy. After all, she moved in circles he could only dream of joining. But then he saw her at a midtown restaurant, laughing, radiant, leaning close to a man far wealthier than he'd ever be. She didn't acknowledge Grant. She didn't even look his way. It was the quiet, dignified cruelty of someone who had never truly considered him significant. Grant waited outside the restaurant until she exited, then followed her toward her car. "Loretta," he called out, forcing a smile. She turned, annoyance flickering across her expression. "Grant, what are you doing here?" "I just wanted to talk. We haven't spoken in days." "There's nothing to discuss," she replied, adjusting her coat. "Our arrangement served its purpose." "Purpose?" His voice cracked. "You told me we were building something, that you believed in my company." Loretta sighed, as though bored by his existence. "You misunderstood. I believed in the image you projected. But now the illusion is gone." Grant felt something inside him tighten painfully. "I left my wife for you." "No," she corrected sharply. "You left your wife because you thought it would get you further. I just offered you a mirror." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a cold whisper. "And now that mirror no longer benefits me." Expropriation. With that, she slid into her car and drove away, leaving Grant standing on the sidewalk as if a hole had opened beneath him. Days later, his company took another hit. A small scandal, nothing catastrophic that hinted at his incompetence. Investors panicked. Emails flowed in demanding explanations he didn't have. His phone buzzed with notifications, but none of them offered solutions. Grant wasn't collapsing because of one disaster. He was collapsing because he had built everything on lies. He tried to call Elena more than once. Not out of regret, Grant wasn't capable of true remorse, but out of habit. She had always been his emotional cushion, the quiet presence he leaned on when life became too heavy. But now every call went to voicemail, every text undelivered. He told himself she was being dramatic. She would come crawling back eventually. Women like her always did. But deep down, Grant felt something new. Fear. One night, he stood in the empty conference room of his company's headquarters, staring at the Manhattan skyline. The city that once made him feel powerful, now pressed down on him with suffocating weight. For the first time in years, he wondered if he had made a mistake. Not just wrong place, wrong time, wrong, but life-altering wrong. The kind of wrong that rewrites a person's fate. He poured a drink, but his hand trembled so violently he had to set the glass down. The room tilted. His breath caught. He gripped the back of a chair to steady himself. He didn't know it yet, but people far more powerful than him had begun to take an interest in his downfall. Interests tied to the Marlowe name. Because Elena's past wasn't as simple as he believed. And soon, Grant would discover the first clue that the woman he discarded was becoming someone he should have never underestimated. Elena's first real step back into the world wasn't dramatic. It didn't happen in a boardroom or a gala, and it didn't involve sweeping gowns or glittering chandeliers. It began quietly, early one morning in Malibu, as sunlight spilled across the ocean, turning the waves gold. She was sketching on the back deck, her hands more steady now, her posture less collapsed when Adrian stepped outside holding 2 mugs of coffee. "There's something you should see," he said. She followed him inside, where he placed a slim leather folder on the table. The insignia embossed on the cover felt strangely familiar, a stylized M intertwined with a crest. Her breath caught. "Marlowe International," she murmured. Her father's company, her inheritance, the empire she'd never believed she would be part of. Adrian opened the folder to reveal an invitation printed on thick ivory cardstock addressed to her. "You're being requested to attend the New York Arts Preservation Council," he explained. "They're restoring several historical landmarks. They've seen your work. They want your artistic direction." Elena blinked. "That can't be right. They don't even know who I am." "On the contrary," he said softly, "they know exactly who you are." A long silence stretched between them. She traced her fingers over the invitation, afraid it might disappear. "I'm not ready," she whispered. "What if I break down? What if they see right through me?" Adrian studied her for a long moment before pulling out a tablet and placing it in front of her. On the screen was a news article. It was her latest sketch, an abstract rendering of grief and rebirth posted anonymously weeks ago by an art blogger who'd stumbled upon it. The sketch had gone viral, praised for its raw emotion and haunting lines. Thousands of comments filled the page, many from women who had endured heartbreak of their own. "You spoke to people," Adrian said, without saying a word. Elena's eyes softened. She wasn't used to being seen, not truly. The flight to New York was quieter than she expected. She sat by the window, watching the clouds drift past, feeling a mix of dread and strength she hadn't felt since before the hospital. When they landed, Adrian escorted her to a private car, but he didn't walk her inside the council hall. "This part is yours," he said. "Elena," he added before she stepped out, "you don't need to prove anything to anyone, not even to yourself. Just walk in there. The rest will follow." Enter 20. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she entered the grand historic building. The council members turned, whispering among themselves. "She's here. That's Elena Marlowe? She looks stronger than I expected." They examined her portfolio, each page reflecting pain transformed into artistry. For the first time in a long while, she felt capable, not as someone's wife, not as someone's tragedy, but as herself. When the meeting ended, the chairwoman extended a hand. "Miss Marlowe, we'd be honored to have you lead the creative direction of the restoration project." Elena inhaled sharply. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. Your work doesn't just rebuild spaces, it rebuilds people." As Elena stepped out onto Fifth Avenue, the city looked different, less threatening, more alive. She had walked into the room alone and emerged with her first victory. She didn't know that a pair of eyes had watched her enter the building earlier. And she didn't know those eyes belonged to Grant Hollister, who now realized Elena Marlowe was no longer the woman he had destroyed. He had no idea what she was about to become. Elena didn't notice the exhaustion settling into her bones until she returned to the Malibu house that night. Her first public reappearance in New York had drained her, but it had also awakened something inside her she'd thought was gone forever. Strength, identity, a spark of the woman she used to be. She stepped inside to find the living room, lit only by the dim glow of a single lamp. Adrian sat on the couch, loosening his tie as though he had been waiting for her in silence. Not impatient, simply present, the way he always was. "You did well today," he said with a soft smile. Elena let out a shaky breath and laid the portfolio on the table. "I'm not sure how I did. I just tried not to fall apart." "That's the remarkable thing," Adrian replied. "You think falling apart is your default. It isn't." She looked away, absorbing his words. Compliments still felt foreign, like clothes tailored for someone else. "Can we talk?" Adrian asked gently. Elena hesitated before nodding. She sat across from him, pulling her knees close, bracing herself for something she couldn't name. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you," he began. "Something about your father." Her shoulders tensed. "You said he trusted you. But how? Why?" Adrian leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "Your father was negotiating a major merger 2 decades ago, one that would have protected his company from a hostile takeover. I was a young analyst at the time, working under a senior executive who, let's say, had questionable loyalty." "You mean dangerous," Elena said softly. Adrian's silence confirmed it. "One night," he continued, "your father asked to meet privately. He suspected someone inside Marlowe International was working against him. He didn't know who, but he believed it was someone close." Elena's stomach twisted. "So he trusted you?" "More than I understood at the time," Adrian admitted. "He told me he'd seen the way I worked, quiet, honest, without the hunger for shortcuts. He said people with patience are harder to corrupt." She swallowed hard, imagining her father making that judgment. "He asked me to keep an eye on certain documents," Adrian said. "And then he gave me a sealed envelope. What was in it? I don't know," Adrian answered. "He told me it was for you. Only for you, and only if something ever happened to him." Elena's breath froze. "And something did." Adrian nodded, regret darkening his expression. The next morning, he was gone. The official story said heart attack. But the coroner's report never matched the truth. "What truth?" she whispered. "That he didn't die naturally," Adrian said quietly. "Your father was targeted." The room felt suddenly smaller, the air colder. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" "Because when your father died, you were still a child. And later, when I found you broken in that hospital, you weren't ready. I didn't want to add another wound." Elena pressed a trembling hand to her mouth as a new grief washed over her, deeper, older, tangled with memories she'd long buried. "Adrian," she whispered, "why would someone want him gone?" He hesitated before answering. "Because he stood in the way of people who wanted to dismantle Marlowe International. And those people haven't stopped." She stared at the pendant he'd returned to her days earlier. It suddenly felt heavier around her neck. "You're saying my father was murdered." "I'm saying," Adrian replied softly, "that your father wasn't the only target." Her heart slammed against her ribs. The pieces clicked: her father's disappearance, the inheritance delays, the corporate attacks, Grant's involvement with powerful people he didn't understand. "Elena," Adrian said, his voice steady but heavy with warning, "someone else has been watching you, waiting." She felt the world tilt again, just as it had in the hospital. But this time, instead of breaking, something inside her hardened, because now she understood something she hadn't before. Grant Hollister wasn't the beginning of her pain, and he wouldn't be the end of it. The morning after Adrian revealed the truth, Elena woke with a cold clarity she hadn't felt in years. The ocean outside her window was wild, crashing against the rocks like it was trying to warn her of something approaching. She dressed slowly, her fingers brushing the engraved pendant resting at her throat, a silent reminder of the father she had lost and the legacy she had never asked to inherit. Adrian waited for her in the study, surrounded by shelves of business journals, legal binders, and documents she didn't yet understand. But she understood one thing now. Her father had been fighting something, and she had been born right into the middle of it. "Elena," Adrian said, rising to meet her, "I need to show you something else." He handed her a leather-bound dossier, heavy, protected, sealed. "What is it?" she asked, palms sweating. "Your father's final asset register. His private one. Not the version the board saw." She opened it with trembling hands. Names, numbers, properties, offshore accounts, patents, art collections, business stakes she never knew existed. Her jaw tightened. All of this belonged to him? All of it, Adrian confirmed. And legally, it belongs to you. Her breath caught. But the board told me the estate was tied up under review, under dispute. They lied, Adrian cut in gently. They've been delaying the transition so they could dismantle your father's holdings piece by piece. Sell them, absorb them, erase him. Elena's pulse hammered in her ears. And erase me. Yes. 10. Affit. She sank into the chair, staring at the empire she never realized she was born into. She used to think she had nothing, no safety net, no name that mattered, no protection in the world. But all along, she had been heir to something enormous and dangerous. Why didn't they come after me earlier? She murmured. Because they didn't need to, Adrian said. Your life was small, quiet. They assumed you'd stay that way. Her chest tightened with a mix of anger and vindication. So that was why Grant had always treated her like nothing. He hadn't even known the truth. He'd thrown her away without realizing he was discarding the very thing he worshipped most. Money, power, legacy. Adrian stepped closer, lowering his voice. Elena, taking back the Marlowe estate won't be simple. These people have influence. They have lawyers, politicians, media. They've spent years maneuvering the company away from your family. But it's mine, she whispered. It is. And you can reclaim it, but not without a fight. Her gaze sharpened. Then I'll fight. The conviction in her voice surprised even herself. Adrian studied her carefully, the corner of his lips lifting not in amusement but in admiration. There's something else, he said. Your father left you an encoded message. I haven't opened it. It's not mine to read. Elena stared at the silver flash drive he placed in her hand. It felt heavier than metal should. He said you'd understand it when the time came. Her throat tightened. I miss him. I know, Adrian replied softly, but a part of him is still guiding you. Elena wiped her eyes, inhaled deeply, and straightened her shoulders. She wasn't the woman Grant abandoned anymore. She wasn't the fragile soul curled in grief on a kitchen floor. She was a Marlowe, and the world was about to be reminded what that meant. Adrian handed her one last folder. This is the list of board members who betrayed your father. Elena flipped it open and froze, because near the bottom of the list was a name she recognized instantly. Grant Hollister. Her ex-husband had been involved all along. The room spun, her breath catching in her throat. And Elena realized she hadn't just been abandoned, she had been targeted. Elena stared at Grant's name on the list, the letters blurring as disbelief surged through her. Of all the betrayals she had endured, this one felt the most surgical. Grant wasn't just a cruel husband or a selfish man blinded by ambition. He had been connected to the very network that destroyed her father's empire long before she ever met him. Adrian watched her carefully. I didn't want to show you until you were strong enough to handle it. She swallowed hard. How involved was he? Adrian exhaled. Grant wasn't important enough to make major decisions, but he was ambitious enough to perform favors. Deliver messages. Gather information. Your father suspected someone was leaking internal plans. We never knew who. Now, Adrian gestured toward the folder. We do. Elena felt cold. She had married her father's enemy without knowing it. Loved him, trusted him, carried his child. What did he get in return? She whispered. Support, access, a foot in the door. But once he failed upward long enough, those same people abandoned him. They don't value loyalty, just usefulness. And Grant is no longer useful, she said bitterly. Exactly. Elena moved toward the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the Pacific. The ocean churned like her thoughts. She wasn't just facing a greedy ex-husband or a hostile board. She was walking into a war her father had died trying to win. What happens next? She asked quietly. Adrian stepped beside her. You take your seat. My seat? Yes, he nodded. You're the majority heir. Once you announce your claim, the board can't block you without exposing their corruption. They've hidden your inheritance for years. They won't expect you to fight. Elena's pulse quickened. And if I do, then the entire landscape shifts. That afternoon, Adrian arranged a private meeting with the remaining allies her father once trusted. They gathered in his Malibu estate, former executives, legal advisors, silent partners who had gone dormant after her father's death. Faces lined with age, caution, and long-buried loyalty. When Elena entered the room, they stood as one. She hesitated. Please, sit. I'm not here to make anyone bow. A woman with silver hair shook her head softly. We stand because the rightful heir has finally returned. Elena felt something tighten in her throat. They reviewed documents late into the evening. Forged memos, hidden transfers, shell contracts tied to Loretta Collins and her network of corporate opportunists. Grant's role was small but pivotal. He had unknowingly delivered a document that enabled the board to freeze parts of her father's estate. He didn't know what he was handing over, Adrian said, but he didn't care either. That's what makes him dangerous. Elena closed her eyes. The hospital, the divorce, the loss of her baby, his cruelty, and now this, a betrayal rooted years before she ever knew him. When the meeting ended, Adrian placed a hand on her shoulder. Elena, claiming Marlowe International will put a target on your back. Are you ready? She lifted her chin, her voice steady. I'm done being hunted. It's time they learn who I am. The next morning, she stood before a full-length mirror wearing a tailored navy suit one Adrian's staff had altered overnight. It fit her like armor. Her hair pulled back, her pendant resting over her heart. She didn't look like a broken woman. She looked like a Marlowe. Adrian opened the door to their waiting car. New York is expecting you. But halfway through the drive to the airfield, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening. What is it? Elena asked, sensing the shift. Adrian handed her the phone. A news alert flashed across the display. Grant Hollister requests. Urgent meeting with Marlowe International's unknown heir. Elena froze. He knew. Somehow, Grant knew everything. And he wasn't coming to apologize, he was coming to beg, bargain, or destroy. The flight back to New York felt heavier than any Elena had taken before. Not because of fear was familiar, but because of the weight of truth now sitting beside her like an unwelcome shadow. Grant wanted a meeting. Somehow, he had discovered the existence of the Marlowe heir. Somehow, he had connected the dots that Elena had spent her entire life avoiding. As the jet descended through the haze of Manhattan, Adrian watched her closely. We'll control the narrative. He won't get within 20 feet of your legal team unless you allow it. Elena nodded, though her stomach twisted. She knew Grant. He never sought meetings unless he wanted something desperately, or unless he was terrified. But beneath the anxiety, another thought clawed at her mind, the list, the betrayals, the people who had let her father die. And at the center of it all, the person whose name appeared more than once, Loretta Collins. After landing, Adrian took her straight to a secured private office in Midtown, wood-paneled walls, glass overlooking the skyline, and files already laid out by his intelligence team. Men and women Elena had never met before nodded respectfully at her arrival. You're the reason we're here today, Miss Marlowe, one said. It still felt surreal. Adrian gestured to the documents. You need to see this before you meet Grant. Elena braced herself as he opened a dossier labeled Collins L. Inside were financial charts, property transfers, communications logs, and a timeline of Loretta's rise to power, a rise built on strategic marriages, discreet coercions, and a network of silent leverage. But then Adrian flipped to a page that made Elena's blood run cold. A photo. Her father, standing beside Loretta Collins, both of them mid-conversation outside a private gala 20 years earlier. That's impossible, Elena whispered. He never mentioned her. He wouldn't have, Adrian said quietly. They weren't partners, they were adversaries. He pointed to the caption on the report. Your father was trying to block her acquisition of a land portfolio. She needed him gone to move forward. The room fell silent. Elena's chest constricted. You're saying she had something to do with his death? We believe she orchestrated the pressure that led to it, Adrian replied. Not directly, but through the people she controlled, including one who later mentored Grant. Elena's breath hitched. Do you mean? Yes. Grant's early success came from the same network that undermined your father. He didn't know the depth of it, but he benefited from it. Her hands clenched. The betrayal had started before she even met him. She had been caught in a web spun long before her first sketch or first heartbreak. And there's more, Adrian said, sliding another document forward. At the top of the page, Collins' estate target identified. Potential obstacle, Elena Marlowe. She felt the air leave her lungs. They targeted me? Your father protected you by removing you from the company after your mother's death, Adrian explained. He hid your identity, changed documents, buried records. But after his death, Loretta searched for you. And when she couldn't find you, she found Grant? Elena finished, her voice hollow. Adrian nodded. He was easy to manipulate, hungry, eager to impress. He didn't know he was being used. Elena sank into a chair, the carpet soft beneath her feet but offering no comfort. So Grant wasn't just cruel, she whispered. He was a pawn. A pawn, Adrian confirmed, who thinks he's a king. Her pulse hammered. She felt grief, anger, clarity, and an awakening strength she hadn't believed she possessed. She lifted her chin. What happens now? Adrian folded his arms. Now you meet Grant, and you show him exactly who you are. But before Elena could speak, the door burst open. A security officer stepped inside. Mr. Sterling, we have a problem. Adrian stiffened. What kind of problem? The officer swallowed hard. Grant Hollister is already in the building. And Fort. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. And he wasn't alone. Grant Hollister pacing in the lobby of the Sterling Tower was a sight no one expected. His suit, once meticulously pressed, was wrinkled. His hair looked as though he'd combed it with his fingers in a rush. The false confidence he used to wear like a tailored coat had cracked, revealing the frantic man beneath. When the elevator doors opened and Elena stepped out, surrounded by Adrian's security team, Grant froze. His breath caught, his eyes widening as if he were seeing a ghost. In some ways, he was. The woman before him was nothing like the Elena he abandoned. Her posture was strong, her gaze steady, her presence undeniably commanding. Elena, he breathed, stepping toward her. She raised a hand. Stop. Grant halted instantly, his throat bobbing as he swallowed. I didn't know. I had no idea you were a Marlowe, she finished coldly. No, you didn't know. You never bothered to ask. Eves. Adrian stepped beside her, protective but measured. Mr. Hollister, whatever agenda you brought into this building ends now. You requested a meeting. Speak. Grant's eyes darted between them, panic flickering beneath the surface. They're after me, he said in a rushed whisper. Loretta's people. They think I know things. They think I'm connected to you. I need protection. Elena blinked. Protection? From the woman you betrayed me with? Grant flinched. It wasn't like that. And neither was. Elena stepped closer, her heels echoing sharply across the marble floor. You left me in a hospital bed. You told me losing our baby was a sign. And now you want my help? Grant's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked desperate, small. A man stripped of every illusion he had built around himself. I didn't know what they were planning, he insisted. Loretta, she used me. I didn't understand her connections. I thought she'd help my career. I thought, his voice cracked. I didn't think she was capable of murder. The word lingered in the air. Elena's chest tightened, anger and sorrow twisting together. You helped the people who destroyed my father, she said. You delivered documents without question. You played messenger for a network built on greed. I didn't know, Grant snapped, louder than intended. His voice echoed through the lobby. If I had known, if someone had warned me. You were warned, Elena cut in. Every time you dismissed my father's legacy. Every time you treated me like I was nothing. Every time you chose ambition over humanity. Grant's face flushed with shame. Elena, he whispered, I came because I don't have anyone else. Loretta turned on me. Her people think I've been talking to authorities. They're watching me. They might come after me tonight. Adrian exchanged a look with his head of security. It wasn't a look of sympathy, it was calculation. Risk assessment. Grant leaned forward, lowering his voice. Please, just talk to me. You don't have to forgive me. I need help. Elena felt something unexpected, a flicker of pity. Not for the man who hurt her, but for the boy inside him who never learned what real strength looked like. But pity was not protection. She drew a slow breath. Grant, the only reason you're in danger is because you dance too close to people who play with lives. My father tried to stop them. They killed him, and you helped them, even if you didn't realize it. Grant's face drained of color. Elena continued, voice steady. I can't save you. His breath hitched. Elena, please. You made your choices, and now you're living their consequences. Grant staggered back, as if struck. But before he could respond, a sharp crack echoed from the entrance like something slamming into the glass. The security team closed in around Elena instantly. A second crack, And then the unmistakable shatter of breaking glass. Grant's eyes widened in terror as he backed away from the doors. "Elena," Adrian said sharply, gripping her arm, "get behind me now." Because whoever Loretta had sent had already found them. The lobby erupted into chaos as shards of glass scattered across the marble floor, glittering like ice under the lobby lights. Alarms blared, echoing through the towering ceilings of the Sterling Tower. Security personnel rushed forward, forming a tight perimeter around Elena and Adrian while pushing Grant behind them, though Grant stumbled, panicked, barely able to stand upright. "Move her back, now," Adrian commanded, his voice sharper than Elena had ever heard. Two guards guided her toward the service hallway, but Elena kept looking over her shoulder. Her heart pounded violently, every nerve screaming danger. She could see silhouettes outside the shattered entrance. 1, 2, maybe 3 figures, quick, coordinated, and unmistakably trained. "Is this Loretta?" Elena whispered. Adrian didn't answer. His jaw was clenched too tightly. Security ushered them deeper into the hallway, away from the open line of sight. Grant clung to the wall, gasping for breath. "They're going to kill me," he choked out. "Elena, they're here because of me." "No," Adrian said grimly. "They're here because of all of us." "Okay." A guard pressed his earpiece. "Two hostiles near the front. They're scattering, one moving toward the east stairwell." Adrian glanced at Elena. "They're not just here to intimidate. They're testing our defenses." Elena's breath hitched. "Testing? For what?" "To see how easy it would be to get to you." Her stomach dropped. Suddenly, the hallway lights flickered. Once, twice. Then half of them went dark, plunging them into a dim amber glow. The guards tensed. "They cut the power grid to this floor," one muttered. "They're better funded than we thought." Grant slid down the wall, hands covering his face. "This is insane. Loretta was never like this, she wouldn't." Elena snapped toward him. "You don't know what Loretta is capable of. You never did." Adrian stepped forward decisively. "We're moving to the secure elevator. It's connected to a backup generator." The security team began ushering them down the hall faster, weapons drawn. Elena could feel the tension vibrating through the air, every footstep a countdown. Adrian stayed close, a steady presence beside her. "What if they reach the elevator?" she whispered. "They won't," Adrian said. "Not before we do." But even he sounded like he was calculating odds. They rounded the corner and froze. The secure elevator doors were open. Empty. Waiting. Two waiting. A guard lifted his weapon. "Clear the area." End quote. Another moved slowly toward the elevator, scanning its interior. For a moment, everything was still. Then, "Behind you," a guard shouted. A figure dropped from the ceiling panel, fast, silent, ruthless. The guard closest to the elevator tackled the intruder before he could reach Elena, slamming him to the ground. A struggle erupted, fists, elbows, weapons clattering against the floor. The intruder's hand darted to his belt, reaching for something metallic. "Gun!" someone yelled. "Take him down." Adrian grabbed Elena, pulling her behind him as the guard delivered a swift, disabling strike. The intruder collapsed, unconscious. Breathing hard, the lead security officer turned to Adrian. "We need to evacuate, now." Grant stumbled forward. "Where? Where are we going?" Adrian didn't even look at him. "Somewhere Loretta's people can't reach. Somewhere only Elena has access to." Elena stared at him, confused. "What place is that?" Adrian's eyes held a truth he hadn't yet spoken. "A property your father left you. Hidden, untouched, and sealed until you were ready." Her pulse quickened. Ready for what? He met her gaze, the weight of the past and the future colliding in his eyes. "To finish what he started." Grant inhaled sharply, fear slicing across his face. "You're not leaving me here. They'll kill me." Elena turned toward him slowly. "You made your choices years ago, Grant. It's optionally." But before she could finish her sentence, a distant explosion shook the building, violent enough to rattle the floor beneath their feet. Adrian grabbed her arm. "Elena, run." Because whatever Loretta had unleashed was only the beginning. The explosion reverberated through the Sterling Tower like a pulse of thunder, rattling glass, shaking fixtures, and sending a burst of dust through the vents. Elena's heart hammered as alarms screamed above them. The emergency lights flickered, painting the hallway in sharp red flashes. Grant stumbled, nearly collapsing, while Adrian tightened his grip on Elena's arm. "Move," he commanded the security team. They rushed down the service corridor, boots pounding against polished concrete. Smoke drifted from the far end of the building. Elena could hear distant shouts, the static crackle of walkie-talkies, the guttural hum of backup generators trying to kick in. "Where are we going?" she shouted breathlessly. "Sub-level entrance," Adrian replied. "Your father built a system under the city. Only a handful of people knew it existed." Grant wheezed behind them. Why the hell would he build a system under Manhattan? To hide the things he didn't want the board to steal, Adrian answered sharply, including his heir. Elena felt the weight of those words, heavier than the pendant at her throat. Her father had known she might need a way out, a way to disappear, a way to survive. When they reached the sub-level checkpoint, 2 guards unlocked a reinforced steel door. Beyond it, a concrete stairwell spiraled downward, cold, narrow, echoing. Grant clutched the railing as they descended. "Elena, please don't leave me behind. I swear, I didn't know what Loretta was doing." Elena didn't slow her pace. "No, you never cared enough to know. I didn't lies and depressage." At the bottom of the stairwell, another door awaited, this one older, thicker, marked with the Marlowe crest, half erased by time. Adrian entered a long passcode, then pressed his palm to a scanner. The door unlocked with a heavy groan. Inside was a corridor unlike anything Elena expected. Industrial lights hummed overhead. The walls were lined with steel filing cabinets, sealed crates, old servers, and boxes labeled with dates stretching back decades. It was a vault of secrets, her family's hidden spine. Her breath caught. "My father built all this?" "He didn't trust the board," Adrian said. "So he built a second headquarters beneath their feet." The hallway ended in a large chamber with a long oak table at its center. Dusty, undisturbed, a ghost of the past. Adrian motioned to a sealed metal case on the table. "This is why we're here." "What's inside?" she whispered. "Your father's final directive. He encoded it so only you could unlock it." Before Elena could respond, a crash sounded behind them. The stairwell door shuddered violently, echoing like a battering ram. Grant paled. "They found us." Adrian's security team drew their weapons. "We need to move. Now." But Adrian stood firm. "No, she deserves to hear what her father left for her." He gestured for Elena to place her pendant into a small indentation on the metal case. Her hands trembled as she did so. The case beeped, then clicked open. Inside was a handheld device, a vintage digital recorder. Elena lifted it gently and pressed play. Her father's voice filled the chamber, worn but warm. "If you're hearing this, my Elena, then you're in danger. And the people I warned you about have finally reached for what they were always after. You." Tears blurred her vision. "I couldn't protect you forever. But I built everything with one purpose, to give you the power to choose your fate." A thunderous blow hit the stairwell door. The security team braced. "And Elena, if Adrian is with you, trust him. He knows more than you realize." She looked at Adrian sharply. Another blow. Metal bending. "He cares for you. I saw it long before he ever did." The door screeched under pressure. Then the final words. "And when the time comes, my daughter, you must decide whether to lead or watch everything fall." The recorder fell silent. The door upstairs buckled, and Elena understood with sudden clarity. They weren't here to escape, they were here to rise. The stairwell door screeched again, metal groaning under the weight of repeated blows. The underground chamber vibrated with each impact, dust cascading from the ceiling. Elena tightened her grip on the recorder, her father's final words still echoing through her bones. She felt the tremor of fear, but she also felt something else rising inside her, something steadier, something fierce. Adrian stepped beside her, lowering his voice. "We don't have much time. What do you want to do?" Elena lifted her chin. "I want to finish this." Grant, pale, trembling, half collapsed against a filing cabinet, stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Finish? Elena, we need to run. You don't understand these people. They'll kill anyone who stands in their way." Elena turned toward Grant slowly. "I'm not running from the people who murdered my father." "But they'll come for you," he insisted. "They already have," she replied. Another slam hit the door. This one bent the upper hinge. The guards repositioned, weapons drawn. Adrian gestured to a console built into the sidewall. "Your father designed fail-safes into this facility. There's a communications system that bypasses the public grid. If you want to expose the board or Loretta, we can broadcast what we know to every division of Marlowe International. Elena's pulse quickened. They won't be able to bury it? No, Adrian said. Not if the message comes directly from the rightful heir. Grant let out a strangled sound. Elena, don't do this. If you reveal yourself, Loretta will come after you harder. She'll come after me too. End quote. Also Dia. Elena stared at him, her expression quiet but cutting. Grant, Loretta isn't hunting you because of me. She's hunting you because you failed her. He went silent. The stairwell door buckled inward, the lock breaking. A guard braced his shoulder against it, shouting for reinforcements through his radio. Adrian pointed toward the console. It's your choice, Elena. Your father built this for you for this moment. Elena stepped forward, her hand hovering over the activation switch. For years, she had allowed others to write her story. Grant, the board, the shadows around her father's death. She had lived small, quiet, invisible. No more. She pressed the switch. A soft hum filled the chamber as the console lit up, projecting her father's crest in glowing blue across the wall. A microphone extended toward her. Elena, Adrian said softly, once you speak, there's no going back. She inhaled deeply, then leaned toward the mic. This is Elena Marlowe, she began, her voice shaking at first. Daughter of Charles Marlowe, true heir to Marlowe International. Across the secure network, screens activated in offices across New York, Los Angeles, London, and Hong Kong. Executives looked up from their meetings. Managers froze mid-conversation. Board members paled as recognition dawned. For years, my father's legacy has been corrupted, Elena continued, her voice growing stronger. He was betrayed by those closest to him. And now those same people have tried to erase me. Adrian watched her with something like awe. I'm here to tell you, she said, that the Marlowe family is no longer silent. I will claim my seat, and anyone who stands in the way of transparency will answer for what they have done. The moment she ended the transmission, alarms blared deeper underground. A guard shouted, they've breached the stairwell. The steel door tore open. Masked figures stormed in. Adrian stepped in front of Elena, voice low and deadly. Stay behind me. But as the attackers flooded into the chamber, weapons raised, something unexpected happened. They stopped. Every single one of them froze, staring not at Adrian, not at the guards, but at Elena. Because now that she had announced herself to the world, Elena Marlowe wasn't just a target anymore. She was the threat. For a long moment, the chamber was frozen, attackers staring at Elena, weapons half raised, uncertainty crackling through the room like static. Her announcement had changed everything. She was no longer a hidden heir or a grieving woman. She was a name backed by a global empire, a name that carried consequences. Killing her now would ignite a corporate war none of them were prepared to face. One of the masked men lowered his weapon first. Stand down, he ordered the others. We were told she was a liability, not that she was Marlowe. His voice shook. Even mercenaries feared the kind of power her father's legacy could unleash. But before the tension could break, footsteps echoed through the stairwell. Heavy, confident, familiar. Loretta Collins stepped into the chamber. She wore a tailored black coat and gloves, her expression poised, untouched by chaos. The intruders parted for her as though she were royalty. She surveyed the underground vault with quiet admiration. Well, Loretta said, her voice smooth, Charles always did have a flair for dramatic architecture. Elena felt every muscle in her body tighten. You have no right to be here. Loretta smiled. On the contrary, my dear, I've had a right to your father's empire long before you were old enough to understand what he built. Adrian stepped forward, positioning himself between Elena and Loretta. This ends tonight. Have her so. If leaded to Marca. No, Adrian, Loretta replied, tilting her head. This merely changes shape. Her eyes flicked briefly to the recorder in Elena's hand. So you finally heard the truth, Loretta went on. Charles suspected me. He always did. But he never realized how deeply his closest allies betrayed him. Elena's jaw clenched. You killed him. Loretta's lips curved, not a smile, but a confession. Influence can kill as effectively as bullets, my dear. Pressure, stress, isolation. You'd be astonished at what a man's heart can't survive. Elena's fingers curled into fists. She felt Adrian's reassuring nearness behind her, but she didn't step back. You targeted me, Elena said. You tried to erase the Marlowe name. No, Loretta corrected. I tried to own it. There's a difference. Grant lurched forward suddenly, frantic. Loretta, please, you have to help me. I did everything you asked. I never betrayed you. Please don't let them kill me. Loretta didn't even glance at him. Grant, darling, you were never anything more than a disposable asset. The words struck him with visible force. Elena watched him crumble, the final thread of his arrogance snapping. For years, she had carried the weight of his cruelty, his manipulation, his abandonment, but now, seeing him unravel under the truth, she felt something inside her shift, not sympathy, but release. He had chosen the wrong side, and that choice was finally calling him to account. Loretta extended a hand as though offering a truce. Elena, you're stronger than I expected, smart, resilient. You're everything your father hoped you wouldn't become. Elena lifted her chin. And you're everything he warned me about. Loretta's smile faded. You can walk away, Loretta said. Forget this. Return to your quiet life. Leave the corporate world to people who understand its dangers. Elena stepped forward, her voice steady. You don't get to write my ending. Loretta's eyes hardened. Then, you've chosen war. No, Elena replied, her voice like steel. I've chosen truth. She reached for the console and pressed send. Loretta's face drained of color. Around the world, every major board, investor, regulator, and media outlet received a full data dump of Loretta's crimes. The shell companies, the bribes, the sabotage, the fraudulent acquisitions. Her empire was crumbling in real time. Loretta's voice cracked with fury. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Elena did. She'd lit the match. And now Loretta Collins was the one standing in the flames. The fallout was instantaneous. Loretta Collins's phone began vibrating violently inside her coat pocket, message after message, alert after alert. Every major financial network across the country lit up with breaking headlines. Her name, her crimes, her empire once untouchable, now collapsing under the weight of Elena's truth. You foolish girl, Loretta hissed, but there was fear in her eyes now. Do you think the world will side with you? Do you think... Elena didn't let her finish. The world doesn't have to side with me, it just needs to see you. Before Loretta could respond, the chamber doors burst open again, this time not with attackers, but with New York State authorities, followed by federal investigators. Armed, coordinated, prepared. They moved past Elena without hesitation and approached Loretta with procedural precision. Loretta Collins, the lead agent announced, you are under arrest for fraud, racketeering, embezzlement, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy related to the death of Charles Marlowe. Loretta's composure cracked. You have no proof. Elena lifted her father's recorder, holding it up like a verdict. I have his voice. Ein quote. And with that, Loretta was escorted out, her empire shattered, her influence dissolved, her reign finally crushed. Elena watched her go with an expression not of triumph, but of long-awaited peace. Justice wasn't loud. It was quiet, heavy, final. Grant, trembling in the corner, tried to crawl toward Elena as if proximity could save him. Elena, please, you don't understand. I didn't know what I was part of. I was stupid. I was manipulated. Please don't let them take me. Everyone. Elena looked at him the way a judge might look at a man who had already been sentenced by his own choices. Grant, she said softly, you were never a victim. You were a volunteer. His breath hitched, the truth cutting sharper than any blade. But the authorities hadn't come for him, not yet. He wasn't on Loretta's level. He wasn't that important. His punishment would come slowly, painfully. The lawsuits, the debt, the public humiliation, the career death. And the knowledge that he had thrown away the only person who ever loved him. The agents moved past him without a second glance. That hurt him more than handcuffs ever could. Adrian stepped closer to Elena, his voice low. Your father would be proud. She turned toward him, exhaustion and relief mingling in her eyes. I hope so. He would, Adrian repeated. And he would tell you that this, your strength, your courage, was always there. You just needed something worth fighting for. If you ared for, Elena exhaled shakily. I'm tired of fighting. Then let me carry the rest with you, he whispered. They stood amidst the remains of an empire, broken files, scattered documents, dust drifting through the glowing emergency lights, yet somehow it felt like the beginning of something new. In the following months, Marlowe International formally reinstated Elena as its rightful head. The media called her the Phantom Heir, the daughter who rose, the woman who toppled a dynasty. But Elena didn't care for titles. She cared for restoration of her father's work, of her own sense of self, of the life she wanted to build moving forward. Adrian remained by her side, not as a protector now, but as a partner, someone who didn't stand in front of her or behind her, but with her. Love didn't bloom overnight, it grew slowly, respectfully, with room for healing. Eventually, it became strong enough to shape a future together. Years later, Elena watched her 3 children, hers and Adrian's heirs, running across the lawn of their Hamptons home, laughter echoing into the warm evening air. She held Adrian's hand as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the world in soft gold. She had lost everything once, but she had rebuilt a life richer than anything she had ever imagined. And somewhere in the quiet of her heart, she whispered to her father, "We made it, we're home. Justice served, legacy restored." Story completed. The Marlowe name lived on stronger than ever. So, that's where our story closes, my wonderful friends. And if you're still here with me right now, listening until the very last moment, then something in Elena's journey has touched your heart in its own quiet way. Maybe it reminded you of your strength. Maybe it reminded you that even the deepest wounds can become openings to a new life. The Stoics used to say, "The obstacle is the way." Marcus Aurelius wrote that the things meant to break us often become the things that remake us. Elena's fall wasn't the end, it was the beginning of her rising. And maybe, in your own life, the pain you didn't choose is shaping the person you're meant to become. Another Stoic truth is this: you can't control what others do to you, but you can always control how you rise after. Elena didn't win because she was unhurt. She won because she refused to stay broken. If this story made you feel something, even just a spark of courage, take a second to like this video, share it with someone who might need hope tonight, and subscribe to our channel so you don't walk this journey alone. Your heart matters, your story matters, and you're stronger than you think.